Hello everyone. In this video we will be discussing about what config maps are, what are they used for, and how to create and manage them in Kubernetes environment. Also we will be doing a lab exercise to make sure we got much clear knowledge on this topic we discuss here. Okay, let's get started. So what config maps are? Config maps are a way to store configuration data so that can be accessed by pods in the Kubernetes, right? So use the config map for setting your configuration data separately from application code. Meaning, so you don't want to put all your application specific or configuration details in the image or your deployment configuration details or in the deployment configuration, right? So whereas you can store all the application specific configuration details in the config map, so your deployment configuration can use the config map to get the application information. So what information we are storing in the configuration data? So config map will be storing application specific settings or database connection strings or other data that's specific to your application. Right. So the config map, it's not designed to put lot junk data. It's specific to your application or database kind of string, a small data. So since you are separating your application specific configuration detail separately in the config map, it is easier to manage your image and update your image in the future. So that's another benefit. Also, this configuration details can be shared to multiple pods or service in the Kubernetes resource, right? So what is the limitation? So there are few limitations in the config map, like as we discussed, it is not to store all your data, but only the application specific settings or database connections or any specific small details you can put it on the config map. So the size of the config map object should be less than 1 MB, right? Also the key value must be a string. You cannot store integer value into the config map. Also the important one, config map does not trigger rolling update in the pod. So meaning if you update something in the config map and you are used in the environment as a config map, it will not restart your pod. You have to restart your pod. But when you use the mount volume, it will automatically get refreshed. The value will be updated in the pod. That's detail we'll be seeing in the our session, right? So how do we use that in the deployment process, right? So one of the example we'll see, we would be having multiple way to deploy our application. So here we'll be seeing scenarios like you want to deploy application in 3 different environment, like a dev, UAT, prod, and you will be having, first of all you need an image, isn't it? So I have an image, and the image will be called through your configuration deployment config. In the deployment config you will be specify the image location where it has to come from, right? So but since you have a 3 different environment record, the application will be working in different way in that 3 different environment. Like for example, your database name would be different for development environment, database name would be different environment, value would be the UAT prod. So also sometime you will be sending data to external URL or Splunk or Kibana kind of thing, right? So those URL you can configure in the config map. So those information get pulled from the config map and it will deploy your pod. Pod will create your applications, right? So you have an image. The image will be pulled from deployment config use these 3 different config map that will create the pod, and you got the 3 different applications. Application deployed on 3 different environment with the 3 different configuration, right? So being said that, we don't want to manage the 3 images for dev image, UAT image, prod image, whereas we have only one image, but configurations will be pulled from the config map. So your application deployed on 3 different environments. So this is why we say it is easier to manage your application, right? So you would not be required to keep 3 different images, but inject the application config information from config map to container. So yeah, this is how your config map is helping. Let's see how config map structure. Now we'll understand the structure of config map. So config map resource in the Kubernetes is defined by a YAML, right? So we'll see an example. So if you look at any object in the Kubernetes, that will have a object name kind. Right? The kind is the config map here, and it will have the metadata. Metadata will be having the names like any other object in the Kubernetes. The one thing we specifically interested on in the data field. So data field is the one we store our configuration data. So all the configuration data stored as a key and value pair, So here key is the my key, value is the my value. So this example shows the single key value pair, right? You can have multiple key and value pair data. Creating config map. You have different method to create a config map. OC create config map, and you can pass specific argument from literal, from file, from environment file. So let's see what are the difference, why we want these different methods, right? Also we have a OC apply, like how we create other object using the Kubernetes manifest file, right? So Kubernetes manifest file is nothing but in the previous slides we seen how a config map structure looks like, right? The same way you need to create a config map file and just apply in the Kubernetes environment, that will create a config map. Now see config map creation using the from literal option. So from literal option you need to pass key and value pairs. Let's see an example. So use the kubectl config map, and my config map name is the my config. So from literal host test. Host is the key and test is the value. I am passing another literal, which is domain is the key, com is the value. So you can pass multiple literal with the key and values. So when I run this command, so it will create a config map as below, like a config map is the object name here, and name is the config, my config, which is I provided here, and the namespace is the default namespace where you run this command. It takes the current, it will create on the current namespace. So data domain.com, domain is the key, com is the value, host is the key, test is the value. Let's create a one config map here. So kube host is equal to domain is equal to com. Yeah, it's created my config map here. So get config map. So it will show the available config map. So I'm going to look at my config map, my config -o YAML. So it will display the detailed information. So this is how it is created now. this is the creation time when you create, and this is the data configuration, right? So now we have seen how to create a config map using from literal option. Now we'll see how to create a config map using from-env-file. So specify a path to the file to read key of value pair to create a config map. Let's see an example, right? So use the same like a command, but you have to use the from-env-file, and so wherever you keep the file, you give the file information, right? When you give the file information, it will create same as what we created earlier, domain and host test. So how does your file looks like? So your file should be looks like this, like host and test domain com. So your host is the key, domain also is the key, test is the value, domain com is the value. So it read the file and put it like this, domain com host test. So that comes under your data field. Let's see, we'll create as an example here. So before create, I like to delete the existing one, right? I'm deleting the existing one. So we'll go ahead and create the file. File is already there. So let me use the kubectl create config map from env file equal to /root of file.yaml. My config, I missed the config name. Yeah, it's created now. So I'm using the same command to verify what has been created. Use the domain and test. Domain is the value. Whatever we have given in the file, it's created here, right? So make sure it is the key. This is key. And this is value, this is value. So how to edit the config map? So go here, use edit option, go here and add anything you want, like a subdomain is .n and save it. Now if you look at your config map, you will be seeing the changes what you did currently. Okay. So now that we have seen how to create a config map using from-env-file, let's see how to create a config map using from-file option. So the from file, you can give a file or a directory. If you provide the directory, config map will be created using files under it. Right. Let's see both example here. So this how you will be giving the path. You have to either you can give the file or directory as we said. Right. So we'll use the same example and we'll see what are the difference we see from how it act when we give directory, how we give the file, right? Before doing that, I'm going to delete the existing config map. I deleted. Let me clear my screen. So I'm gonna use the same method. Instead of env, I'm giving only the from file option. Let's run this. right? Now if I look at my config map, I'll see the data, but I see the bit different, right? So earlier it was read each line as a key and value, but this time it put my file name as the key and the value or whatever content of the file is the values. So that's the difference between env from env file to from file. So from env you will be seeing key and value, whereas from file you will be seeing your file name as the key and the value will be data what you have in your file. So that's the main difference you can see. If you see the earlier output, you will see only data under key and values, but whereas here your file name is also added as a key and values are your content of the file. Right. Let's go ahead and create a directory cm. I'll also copy this file.yaml to the cm folder. Also I'll create a file 1.yaml. Let's use this directory to create a config map. Before that we'll use the different name to create a config map, and we'll be clear on what's the different it creating, right? I'll use config map 1. Instead of file, I'm gonna give the directory name. Now that it's created the config map, so I'm gonna review my config map, which is my config 1. Now it read the directory and whatever file it has, it put the file name as the key and the value of is like what the content, the file content is the value now, right? So I hope you understand what's the difference between from-env-file, from file, even the file you can give the directory, right? There are multiple methods to create the config map. Okay, alright, so we have another last method to create a config map using the manifest file. Right, so manifest file creation is nothing but, so you have to have your configuration, right? So I'll be using one of our configuration and so I'm gonna take this as my configuration, right? And then I'm gonna create a manifest file using this config map. So you can remove these details, revision details. Also I like to remove this one. I'll be using just key and values of like a env method. So I have one, this is called a manifest file. The manifest file will be saying API version, data field, which is your configuration data, kind is the config map, metadata name, and namespace is default, right? So here I'm going to change my name to test config map 2. So I'm gonna use kubectl apply -f/var temp cm yaml. So it's saying there is some issue with my config map, cannot unmarshals. Okay, I got what's the issue, right? So we removed the file name as the value, so but it read the content as it is. So I just want key and values only. So I'll be using this method, JSON format. Now that it's got created, if I run kubectl get cm is nothing but config map. So I have got created 3 config map now. So you can give specific config map name and -o. You can give YAML to verify what has been created now. This is the config map, and the config map name is config2. It's not only YAML, you can give JSON as well. So it gives your output as a JSON format. Alright, so we have seen multiple methods to create a config map. It's a time to see how we are going to use the config map we created. Alright, so here we'll be seeing how to use the config map in the deployment. So we have multiple options to use your configuration data into the container. Like one of option is you can populate the configuration data as an environment variable in the container, or you can use the command line arguments or inject the content into the volumes. The one thing is the mounted config maps are updated automatically. So meaning when you change the configuration data, when you change the values in the config map, if the config map is mounted already in the container will automatically refresh the updated data. So it will get the updated data. Whereas if you are using as an environment variable, that will not get updated automatically. You need to restart the pod to get modified data. So the kubelet service will watch the config map. If there is any changes, it will push the changes to your container. Okay, so let's see how to populate environment variable in container. So here is the example how to use your config map into your container, right? So you can use env option. There are 2 options we can use, env from or env. So I have covered here env option. So env option, you can create test. What the important point is, you need to call your my config map, right? So env is the spec. It comes under a spec container and env. So env will give a name to the environment and the value from the config map key reference. So which config map? Config map is my config map, and host, key. Key, I'm saying the host. So the host is the key. The value will be set to, the value of the key will be set to here. Okay, let's see how it works. So when I apply this with the changes in the deployment, and after I log into the pod, if I search for the environment in the running pod with the test keyword, I will be having test as the value, right? So you see in the host is, let's see an example. So I have a Nginx deployment file. So it just have a container, Nginx container image, right? Let's call our environment specific values. So it will create your environment variable. Alright, so I added the code here. Let's go ahead and apply this Nginx file. kubectl apply -f var temp nginx. Nice, my deployment is got applied. Let's see get pods. Okay, I'm getting some error. Let's see what's the error. kubectl get logs. Let me make sure we have a config map get cm my config-o YAML. Okay, the config map we created is the different method, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and edit my config map. Edit my config. So it should be a key and value pair. Otherwise, I need to call different method in my different for the different structure. So I edited my config map as a key and value pair. I'm going to save that. Right. So as we said, whatever config map you edited, it will not it will not restart your pod. So you have to do it manually unless you use this data as a volume. So get pods. Now that it start running, because it never started and it automatically read the volumes, read the configuration data and started the container. But if the container was already running, if you edit anything, the data will not be populated here as an environment variable. I'm going to log into the container. -it bin bash env. You see you have a lot of environment variable. Let's look for the specific one, test. There you go. So you got the environment variable is the test env and value is the test, right? So if you look at the deployment config now, go back our deployment config, the test env is the name we given here, and the test and the value come from the config map. If you see the config map, the host value is the test, right? If you look at the deployment, in the deployment we have mentioned key host. The value of the host is test. Yep. So this is how we need to set the config map to set the environment variable. Alright, next we see how to use the command line arguments, right? So you can refer any configuration data in the command line argument as the screen says. So in the command line you can say the important one, you need to call, you have to create the a variable from the config map key. That names you can use it in the command line. So if you do that, when the pods are running, when you see the logs of the config map, the pod, you will be seeing the output of the config map values. Let's see this example too here. I'm gonna edit my same deployment file. Hence, I have one deployment. I'm going to edit that deployment. So give this deployment name here. Right. Come here. So in the container, you can add the command anywhere. I'm going to add it here. So command Okay, so I added the command here, and also I called the configuration config map, the value name we created here. This test env will have the value of the host coming from the config map name called myconfig, right? So I would be expecting the value is test of this running log. So when I edit, the pod would be restarting here. Get pods. Okay, it's trying to restart. Yeah, the pods were restarted in seconds ago. Let's go and see log from one of the pods. Let's take any of the pods. Yeah, this is how the logs were updated from the config map host value. I'll go ahead and show you one more time. Config map get cm-o my config -o YAML. So the host is the key, value is the test. Whatever value you change here, your config your log will be showing that one there too. Let's test it that too. I'll be changing this edited, right? So let's go and if you edit anything, your pods won't be get restarted unless you use them as a volume. Sorry, in the volume also it will not restart it, but the value get updated automatically. Now if I look at the logs of the running pod, I will be still seeing that test because it will not be updated automatically. Let's go and restart our pods. So rollout, we will say rollout restart deployment nginx deployment. So this will roll out all your pods. It's terminating and getting created. Okay, the pods are running now. kubectl logs. This is how you got the edited now, right? This kind of one of the example used. Alright, so now that we have seen two examples, now we'll be seeing injecting content into the volumes. So injecting config map content into the volume is the way to use the data stored in the config map within the pods file system. This can be done creating a volume and volume mount in the pods manifest file and specify the config map as the source for the volume, right? So this is how we need to put it in your deployment file. So nothing but you need to create a volume. In the volume you need to say, hey, my volumes are come from the config map, right? If you say this, it will create it creates a volume. That volume you are calling here volume mount. The volume mount, this whatever data available in this config map will be comes under a etc config directory as a to file. Let's say now we have my config has the two data, which is host and two keys, host and domain. So you will be seeing two files under etc config file called host and domain. If you open that two files, you will be see the data, which is the value of the keys, which is for host keys test, and the value of the domain is .com. So this will be you seeing the output. Config2 files will be get created, and the output will be a value of the keys. Let's try this in our lab too. Alright, so I added the volumes, a name called config volume, and the config map name will be my config. Right. So this volume I'll be mounting here under the container. My container name is the Nginx container. On the container I'm mounting the volume. The mount will be a config volume, which is the same name what you given here. You have to give here too, right? And this name will pointing to my config map, and then it will mount it in etc config. Get pods. Okay, I'm gonna apply this manifest. Oh, it was some error. Now that it applied here, so kubectl get pods, it terminating the existing pod and recreating the new pods. Pods got ran in 5 seconds ago. Let's log into one of the pod, exe, and give the pod name here. -it bin bash. You can go to etc config, and you will be seeing two files with the key name, right? If I look at the host, I'll be seeing edited as the value. Remember, we change the value to edited, right? If I see host and domain, it will have the com as the value. Since its new line is not working, coming like that, that's fine. You can open and verify. I don't have a, it does not have a vi command inside. Or you can do this too. From here, cat etc config / domain. It will print you the output, right? Nice. So let's edit the config map and make sure the pods are refreshing the values, and the files getting the new values in it. Host will put back to test 1, 2, 3 or whatever. It won't reflect immediately, right? So it may take time. Let's see. So host still showing edited, right? We'll put watch or something. Yeah, now it's got changed. Yes, it took a minute to get reflected. That's fine. So we tested how to inject the content into volume, right? So your config map or configuration data is created as a file into the container path where you specify. So how to update and delete the config map? So we seen use the kubectl edit config map name to edit your current config map. Also you can use the kubectl apply command to change the values, and also you have a patch command. Use this kubectl patch. CM is the config map. Specify your config map name, and P is the patch, right? So here data, you can give data. The host is the key name, and the value whatever you need you can put it. So it will change your config map details. Yeah, you can try that too. kubectl patch cm my config -p start with data colon. So data is your config map data field, right? So yeah, that one you need to give. And in the data field, which one you want to change? I have a host is my key name, and the value I'm going to set up new one, my patch test. So close the bracket, and yeah, your config map got updated. Now let's see config patch ocget cm my config -yaml. This got updated, right? Even your volume may get refreshed in a couple of minutes. That's for sure. Yeah, let's come back and see that. So how to delete? It's a straightforward kubectl delete config map name. Also you can use your whatever config map manifest you have, you can use the delete option. It will delete your config map. Whatever name you provide in the manifest, it will go and look at the config map and delete it on the namespace what you have mentioned. So that's all. So we have pretty much covered all the topic what we discussed, like what config maps are, what are they used for, how to create, how to manage, how to update, how to delete, and different method of using the config map, and also different method of creating config map, right? Hope this video would help you, and I would suggest you do some practice yourself, so that will give you more understanding. Thank you. Thanks for watching my video. See you again.